Hello, everyone. This is Steve Elizalde, and thank you guys for joining the webinar today. And hopefully I'll be able to answer a lot of those questions that you have about getting more books into stores and what people are looking for. So thanks again for being on here. For those of you that don't know, there is a side on your right-hand side where you can actually chat. And so chat to us for any questions that you have during the presentation. I'm happy to answer them and pause, although at the end we will do questions as well. So feel free to stop anytime and fire those off, and we'll be able to answer them as we go. Okay? Hopefully this presentation is going to last about 30 minutes, maybe up to 45, and then so we should have plenty of time for questions. But if it does get a little bit long, I'll let you guys know that I'll have to hold off on some questions so that we can continue through the presentation. Okay? With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Of course, the first thing we want to do is, first question we have is, sorry about that, what to expect from a book deal. So this is the first one I started with because more often than not, people want to know about book deals. They want to know about traditional booksellers, or excuse me, publishers, and so they want to know what to expect if you happen to get a book deal from a traditional publisher. So the first thing that you have to understand when you get a book deal is that you don't have any control. You literally lose control over a lot of the books of your book. You know, you lose control over the look of the book, the cover design, the interior layout, how it's presented. Sometimes you even lose your voice because the editors are kind of going through it and could literally change how you sound within the book. So you really don't have much control. When you look at guaranteed sales is interesting because a lot of traditional publishers will put a minimum on your sales for the book. So they're happy to give you a royalty, they're happy to give you an advance and buy those rights from you, but they put that minimum number on there and say, well, look, if you don't sell at least this many books, then you're going to need to make up the difference. So what happens is they might have a minimum of 10,000 copies that they want to sell, but the book only sells 5,000. It ends up being that you have to buy 5,000 copies of your own book. And so that can be very costly, and that advance disappears in a heartbeat. So a lot of people that are in their first deal don't really realize that some of those type of things can happen when you're talking to these traditional publishers. Another issue is that you don't necessarily have books for your own purposes. Generally speaking, you have to buy those books from your publisher if you want to sell them in the back of the room. So for those of you that are business authors, for example, or you're professional speakers, and you want to go and talk about your content, talk about whatever it is might be, and also, by the way, sell your book, you have to buy those books from the publisher. Of course, you do get a bit of a discount, but you still have to buy them before, and then you can sell them at the back of the room. So you don't necessarily own those books outright. So that's a couple of the interesting things on there. Some of the things to watch out for, and a lot of times, if an author has several books that they produce, whether it's an ebook or a regular printed book, if it has some past sales history measured on something like BookScan, which, for those of you that don't know, BookScan is the measuring stick that the publishing industry uses in order to measure the sale of a book. And so when you have books registered on BookScan, what ends up happening is the publishers can look at that and say, well, this person's got a lot of sales, and it gives you a little bit of leverage and leeway to negotiate some of this stuff out of your traditional deal contract. So just some things to keep in mind from those kind of traditional book deals. Okay. If you have any questions, feel free to type away on that topic as we move on to the next one. So the next topic that everybody wants to know, and basically the theme of this entire webinar, is how do you get books into bookstores? Well, that's always the tough part, and of course, if you get your books into bookstores, it's going to increase your sales naturally. So the first thing we need to know is we need to understand understand what the buying habit of that buyer is. What do they look for when they're trying to decide what to bring in? And one thing that you'll know throughout this presentation is that I reference buyers. Uh, One of the things to remember that is if you don't have a distributor and you want a distributor to pick up the book so that you can get more sales and have a bigger reach in as far as distribution goes, all you need to do are all these things that are in this referring to buyers. Those distributors are also looking for that same criteria. So it's something to keep in mind that buyers and distributor can be interchanged during this presentation. Okay. And first off, you have to understand the timelines. Timelines are key. You go into a store, these stores are buying for months and months ahead. The typical retail outlet operates 6 to 7 months ahead of time. That's a pretty long lead time. And most authors think that if they produce a book right now, I can get it in by October and we're good for the fall. Well, actually, the retailers right now are done with 2015. They're already looking to 2016 at this point. So if you're in the middle of a manuscript and you're about to get books by the end of July, thinking that you can get in for the 2015 holiday season, unfortunately, you've missed it, and you got to look to the next holiday season. So very important. It's something that most authors don't realize how that works. And what's interesting is that these buyers have a specific budget that they are allotted for each buying season, so for every quarter of the year. And so when they operate 6 or 7 months in advance, they have the maximum amount of budget for that area. And it's not only just budget when it comes to money, it's also budget becomes with regards to the room, with the space that's in their outlet. When you think about it, there are millions of books that come out every single year, millions. But the local bookstore can't carry millions. They can carry several hundred or maybe a couple thousand for some of the big ones. But that's about it. So when they operate this far out in advance, they are allotting that space already. And once that space is taken up, they're done and they're moving on to the next season. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, they do have a few little holes here and there that they hold back and kind of squirrel away, if you will, so that they can hold on to it in case there's a major event. For example, Robin Williams passing away last year. That was a major event that they had specifically room for that type of event. So they have that on there. And hopefully that makes sense for that. But I hate to say it, but there is kind of a death list or death watch list for a lot of these publishers and retailers, because at some point someone of note is going to pass away, and so they'll hold on to it so that they can actually have enough room to be able to cover not only the books that are coming out normally, but also those high-impact books that they don't want to miss out because something literally just happened. The last thing you want to understand with those timelines is that it really helps the PR and marketing for their decision. A lot of times what you find is that authors may not have the PR lined up, may not have the marketing lined up, and because they don't have that lined up yet, they operate far enough in advance that, you know what, if they kind of like a book, but they want to see what that marketing looks like, there's enough time where if you can get a little bit of marketing, PR, get that information to them, and they can still make their decision. But being able to kind of hold and carve out a little bit of space for it really helps. Okay. So any questions on that, feel free to type away. One thing we have is BookScan data publicly accessible? Unfortunately, no. BookScan data is not publicly accessible. It's strictly accessible to publishers, and there is a membership fee that publishers have to pay in order to be a part of BookScan and be able to see all those sales. So that's a very tough one. But if you're talking to a publisher and they're trying to decide whether or not they want to take your book, you can ask them when you submit your book. You can ask them to see what your official sales were, but you estimate your sales to be X amount. Usually, a nice publisher or if they're a nice person will look it up for you and kind of give you that information if you're really interested in it. So, I know I would if you asked me. So. All right, hopefully that answers that question. All right, moving on to the next one. So buyer behavior, what are they looking for? So these are the 7 things that buyers look for in order to decide whether they are going to bring your book in or not. So as you can see, they have the proper genre, and what I mean by proper genre, that is if your book is very, shall we say, wooey with lots of things about personal success, but it's very spiritual in nature. It probably shouldn't belong in a business atmosphere as a business book, even though there is a personal success category in business. It's not the proper genre because it's very wooey, as people like to say in the industry. Where you really need to go is it needs to be properly shelved in self-help. And the self-help genre also has a subcategory of personal success. So that's something to keep in mind, that the genre does need to reflect the content. We have appropriate price. The price point does need to be correct. Too high and the buyers won't bring it in. Binding. If you have binding refers to hardcover or paperback. So if you have a hardcover book and it's in a self-help genre, for example, they're not really going to bring it in because it's in self-help. They prefer paperback. Page count is very big, and by the way, we'll get into all of these in detail here in a moment. But page count is big because if you have low page count but a high price, that's gonna be a problem. So that's something to keep in mind. Page count does help determine some of these other factors. Very important. The buyers want to know if you're getting the word out that your book actually exists. Then we also have platform. Platform is your audience. Who are you speaking to? What's your brand? Well, buyers want to know that because again, it goes into helping their decision on whether to bring a book in and what kind of chance it has to sell. And then finally, we have cover. And even though it's last on the list, it's not least by any stretch, because the cover will make or break that decision. Okay. So let's get into some detail here. So the first one is the number one reason buyers decline books is the genre. And it's odd when you think about it, but it is true. Every retailer is different. Their demographics are different. Therefore, the books they carry have to be geared towards that demographic. A perfect example would be Office Depot. If Office Depot is going to carry books, they're going to carry more of the business books, maybe the occasional self-help, but it's going to be really geared toward business. And they're not going to carry Twilight. They're not going to carry a fiction title because that's not where the customers are looking for that particular book. Their customers are looking for things that are going to help themselves as a business person or help themselves at their office in general. So the demographic is very, very important. And even though a lot of authors like to say, my book is for everybody, everybody wants this book, that means everybody should carry it. Well, that's not really necessarily the case. You really have to look at and be honest with yourself and say, where is this book geared towards? Who is going to pick up this book most likely? And that's going to help you determine which retailer is more appropriate to approach. And obviously, the local bookstore is going to take just about everybody, But when you're really looking at some of these specialty shops and trying to uncover some of the more obscure sales that can move the needle for you, you really got to understand uh, what that demographic is of that retailer. The other thing is bad timing for the genre. Believe it or not, there is a good and bad timing for various types of books. Children's books coming out in January, February, worst times to come out. And people aren't buying children's books for their kids. They've bought 1,000 children's books for their kids during Christmas. Why would they buy more in January? So children's books are a bad idea for January, February, or business books in summer. People don't generally buy business books in the summer. Even though your business travelers are still traveling, the people that are traveling the most are actually families, and they're the ones buying most books during the summer. And business people aren't buying as many books in the summertime as you think. You really want to look at what time of year you're bringing your book out, and as well as what type of retailer you're appealing to.
Okay. When I was younger, I went through a cozy mystery.
We have a question here. What is the best timing for fiction? So the best timing for fiction is generally
cozy mysteries that have
on fiction. And I apologize, we're getting some feedback here. So we're working on that little technical difficulty. But the best time for fiction are actually 2 times of year. First time of year is summer, right around May. You want to get in right before the summer rush, because for fiction, the interesting thing about it is there's a lot of what everybody likes to call beach reads. And so if you have some of those beach type reads, they're not necessarily real serious, but they're a little bit lighthearted, kind of fun. Summertime is great for those type of fiction books. The next best time for a fiction book is right around September, October. That is also a great time getting in right before the holiday rush. Those are great, especially your more intense thrillers, mystery thrillers. Those are great times for that because people are really combing and looking for those books, those type of books, especially as a gift. And let's face it, who doesn't like to find who doesn't like to be the first one to find an awesome new author that was just an incredible book and they want to share it with their friends? Perfect time for that. So hopefully that answered your question on that one. Any others? Feel free to fire away again. Moving on to the next one. Looks like we have a duplication there. Sorry about that. So moving on to the next slide. Price is key. $1 off in either direction is a killer, and that is very true. Buyers, if a book is $1 too high, they're not going to take it, and so they will decline that book. If it's $1 too low, they may take it, but then you also may not make any money either. So that price is really, really key to finding that harmony. The first thing they ask themselves, and the buyers ask themselves, is it appropriate for the genre? Is that the right price? For example, a business book, most business books run in the $20 range, and that's generally where you find most of them. But a fiction novel is going to run in mid-teens. They generally tend to be a lot cheaper. Now, obviously, there are exceptions. When there are some fiction novels that are higher, and same thing for business books. There are business books that are lower. But by and large, that's kind of the wheelhouse they look for. So if you're wondering if you're anywhere in the neighborhood, go on Amazon. Find out, look at other books that are in your genre, and see what the price point is. The number one mistake authors make when they go and decide that they want to price their book, they try to price it like you would any other commodity. I paid X amount for this product. I should make a 50% margin on it. Therefore, my price should be Y. Well, unfortunately, that's not how it works, because if your book let's face it, me personally, I'm not going to spend $30 on any book unless it's an author I love. And for me, that's reality. So, and that's the way the general public views it as well. So you really have to keep that in mind. um, is there a specific budget allotted? So there's only so much and so much room, and so what they want to know is uh, they take that book and that price point, and that money, that well of money that they have, dries up fast on a higher priced book. So if there's a $30 book, that book better be singing for them, and uh, and so that is very, very important, because if they buy a $30 book, that means probably two $15 books that they can't buy. And so you have to look at it in that aspect of it, because it is important for them to be able to get as many titles as they can, honestly, for as economically as they can. So it is important to them. And the last one we have here is, it does help to look at PR and marketing to make their decision. You want to know that there's a chance for it to sell. And so when you get that price point in, it's important to be able to see that the price is reflective of that as well. Because even if the marketing is really good, the PR is going to have a very hard time. Or excuse me, the pricing is it's gonna be a little bit tricky. So the question we got here is, how much does hardcover versus paperback impact the retail price of the book? It affects it greatly. In fact, one of the things that you find is that a hardcover book generally needs to stay in the $20 range. You want to be a little bit higher on that. Um, and when you go with paperback, you need to be in the teens. What happens is, when you're producing a book and you're producing it as a hardcover, oddly enough, in the publishing world, it can be a little bit cheaper at times to produce a hardcover than a paperback. But the buying habits of a customer is that if you produce a hardcover, then you're going to need they're expecting to pay a higher dollar amount. But if you're producing a paperback, they expect to pay a lower amount. So if you have a paperback book, even though it's 400 pages long, and it costs you, let's just say $14 to print, unfortunately your price still needs to be around 20 or a little below 20, because it's paperback, and that's the perception that the general marketplace has, is that they want to see the paperback price lower. So that's where down the road page count is going to play a key role in that. One thing, we've got another question here. So what can you do if your traditional publisher puts your book out at a widely inappropriate price? For example, $25 for fiction. That's a tough one especially when you're talking about a traditional publisher, because there's really not much you can do from a traditional publisher when they do that. If you think back to what we talked about, where you relinquish control once they buy the rights from you, part of that is also included in the price point. You have no say in what that price is. And if they are wildly inappropriate, unfortunately, that's their decision, and it's something that you have to swallow, and it's a tough pill to swallow. And unfortunately, that probably means a little bit lower sales, but on the flip side, down the road, it might be easier to get the rights back and then reproduce it on your own as with a lower price point. But unfortunately, there's just nothing you can do about it. Okay. Moving on to the binding. Binding, we mentioned earlier that binding is important, and it's more important than you think. It really is, because when you look at your genre, you have to look at your genre in order to determine what bind to use, whether it's paperback or hardcover. As mentioned, self-help really requires paperback. When people are trying to improve themselves, it's usually people that quite frankly, are struggling. and they unfortunately don't have enough money to really spend on a $25 self-help book. They are waiting on that $12 to $15 price point. So that's why it's so important for paperback. And every buyer and distributor you talk to, if you write a self-help book, they're going to say, well, it needs to be in paperback, not hardcover. And that will end your opportunity immediately if you're in the wrong if you have the wrong binding. Business requires hardcover. You know what? Business people want to have a good-looking book on their shelf. They want to say they read it, even though they might not have. But they want to say they read this book, and that book needs to look great on the shelf. And you know what? Hardcover looks much better than it does paperback. There's a certain prestige that comes along with a business book that you really need to have hardcover to make that book sing. Fiction prefers paperback. It's a preference. So there are fiction hardcover, there are fiction paperback, and generally you see about 50-50. Of course, there's a lot of fiction that comes out on ebook. A buyer and distributor would prefer that fiction book to be in paperback. Why? Because when you look at a first-time author trying to get his or her name out there, trying to get people to buy their book, it is a heck of a lot easier to get a consumer to buy a cheap paperback book, in that $12 to $15 range, than it is to try to get that same customer to buy a $22, $23 fiction book from an author that they really don't know. So basically, you're trying to get a more people to buy that book. And so when a retailer or distributor is looking for a fiction book, they're really looking for it in paperback rather than hardcover. Okay. We have another question here. I've seen autobiographies, both hardcover and paperback. Which one should I do first? That's a good question. And you're right. Biographies, you see almost 50-50 in hardcover paperback. I'm going to go a completely different form. I'm going to say come out in ebook first. And the reason I say that is because when you look at memoirs and you look at the general public, they generally would prefer to buy a memoir from somebody they know, somebody that is famous. They want to eat up the gossip or whatever, and so they're more likely to buy a memoir from someone that is well known, whether it's a political figure or a celebrity figure, than someone who's just from the local hometown. But if you really want to have that book come out, and you really want to have something that you can give to people, your friends and family, and maybe people that you know, and it's extremely important to you, and maybe it's part of even your platform because you're a motivational speaker, then I would say come out it's your preference. I would say come out in either hardcover or paperback. It depends on where you are. If you are like I said, if you're a motivational speaker and it's part of your business, and you want to have present yourself in a certain manner, then you want to have hardcover because that's going to give you the best presentation. But if you're looking at it from a standpoint of I'm just happy, I want to have it in my local community, and if people buy it, that would be great. It's an added bonus, but I'm really doing this, as a gift for my family and friends. Then do paperback and get as many people as possible to try to get it as well. And that's where I would go with it. So I know that's kind of a convoluted answer, but hopefully that helps. I have another question here. Why do the big sellers like Danielle Steele and Dan Silva always put out hardcovers, or is it prestige, just for prestige? Well, that's an excellent question. And they're not the only ones that do that. You can go to James Patterson, Stephen King, Dave Ramsey, Tony Robbins. All of these big name authors that are from a traditional publishing house, it's all about money. They know that they're going to have their diehard fans that are going to go out and they're going to buy that hardcover book, and they're going to spend $3 on that hardcover book. I'm as guilty as anybody. I will go and spend $30 on Dan Brown's newest book. He's one of my favorite authors. I just love his books, even though I know they're pretty much the same story every time. I can't get enough of it. But I will go out, and I'm one of those people that will spend $30. Um, and those publishers know that as well. So they're going to go and have those hardcover come out first. Then 6 to 9 months later, that paperback's going to come out, and they're going to capture the rest of the market that's out there. A lot of times they'll come out with what's called the trade paper, which is almost the same size as a hardcover, but just a little bit smaller, and it's paperback. So they're going to come out with that next. And it's a little bit cheaper, but still in that $15 range. And then they'll come out with a third format, which is called mass market, which other people refer to as maybe pocket books, or the books that you find at the airport that are small and $7.99 or $9.99. You know, those much smaller trim size books. They'll come out with that format as well. So it's a money grab to capture every single market that's out there, and that's all it is. Moving on to the next one. Page count. You can't be too high or too low. It needs to be just right, and that it is very true. So the genre will determine your floor and your ceiling. A children's picture book, your ceiling is 40 pages. Don't go over that, or it's an automatic declination. If you're a business book, the ceiling's around 300, but the floor is 150. So you need to be somewhere in that range. Business people generally don't like giant books they have to carry around everywhere. So anything over 300 pages is a little bit unwieldy. But you also don't want to do less than 150 because people don't think they're getting enough out of it, and it's not worth the money that they paid. So it depends on your genre, and the best thing to do, depending on what your genre is, go on Amazon and look at the general page counts that you have. If you actually go on Amazon and pull up a book, about halfway down the page, you'll see some item details, and it'll show you what the page count is. And so get a look at that, and that's going to help you determine just how much to do. If you have a lot to say and you have a business book and it's 300-400 pages, you know what? Probably best to just split it up into 2 books and stagger it when they come out. The general public generally doesn't like books under 200 pages, generally speaking. And the reason for it is because they feel like if they're going to spend $25 on a book and it's 175 pages or 150 pages, it feels too small. It feels like they're not getting enough for their money, and so they shy away from it. Well, because of that, buyers tend to shy away from it as well. So you want to try to be right around that 200. You can be a little bit below, 180, 190. But the general public really likes to be that 200-page mark. Seems to be the general wheelhouse for everybody. Again, it's gonna depend on the genre. It also plays a critical role in determining price point. If you have a business book and it's 100 pages long and it's $25, you're not getting it anywhere. But if you're a fiction novel and you're 400 pages and you're at $14, you're probably going to get a lot of people to buy your book, but are you really making any money? So there's a real balancing act that you have to have with the price point, and to help you figure out where that sweet spot is. Again, go online and see what the general price points are. One thing to look at when you're on Amazon, when you're looking at the price point, you'll notice that it'll say Amazon might say $17, but right above it, kind of grayed out with a line through it, is another price higher. And so Amazon's showing you what your savings you're getting. The actual price of the book, the list price of the book, is that grayed out one. That's the one you got to look at. So when you're measuring it, look at that first. Very important to have. As we move on, marketing and we get to marketing and PR. It needs to be on point. Your marketing and PR needs to be great. Customers need to know your book is out there. It drives people to not only online stores but brick and mortar. Buyers want to know your activity. They want to know that you are actually invested in your book and you are going to push it out there. And it is important that you get it out there because if a buyer doesn't think the author is active, that's the first book that comes off their shelves, or it never makes it in. So very important. Make sure you use social media. Make sure you use online marketing. Those are highly effective nowadays. Whatever you do, do not let a public relations person talk you into spending money on a billboard or a magazine ad. That is the absolute biggest waste of money and the biggest pitfall I see from every single author. Everyone thinks that it's great. My book is on a billboard in Manhattan. This is fantastic. What a great deal. There's only one problem. Nobody knows who you are. I hate to say that, but unfortunately, those billboards are completely ineffective. They're great for somebody who has a name. It adds impressions. If somebody's driving by and they see a billboard for James Patterson, and they're a James Patterson fan, they're gonna log that into the back of their mind and go, oh, I forgot new James Patterson book is out. But if I'm coming out with a book and they look at it and go, oh, and keep on going. And so it doesn't create the effectiveness that you really think it does. Divert those funds to something more effective. That's going to really help you. And right now, online and social media is really going towards that direction. So you really want to focus your attention on that. Okay. Moving on to the next one, platform. Your platform needs to be solid. The bigger, the better. Buyers want to know if you have followers. How many followers do you have on social media? Do you have a newsletter? How many people subscribe to your newsletter? Your platform drives those long-term sales. Someone with a big platform, I'll use an example. Some of you may know Joe Cross. Joe Cross is the juicer guy. He did the Reboot with Joe, and he did the Nearly Dead video that a lot of people might remember. Well, he has a monster platform, and so he has lots of followers, and of course his books are going to sell, and they're going to keep selling because he continues to invest, and his platform continues to grow, so he has those long-term sales, what we like to call a long tail. So that plays a role in determining whether a book comes out. It can also help with direct sales. If you're a business person and you are wanting to sell directly to various organizations, the bigger your platform, the more opportunities you have to make those direct sales and even speak or do some consulting work for them. Buyers scour the internet to make the right decision. They want to know that you have a platform, what kind of platform you have. If you don't have a platform, they're more likely to pass on it because they don't believe that the book has a chance to sell, even though, well, people got to know about it, and so that's what we look at. All right. The next one, cover. Cover is the final pitfall, and definitely not the least. It definitely needs to reflect what's in the book. It must be genre appropriate, but it also needs to stand out without going outside the norm of the genre. One of the biggest problems that authors tend to do is they have a friend who made a beautiful looking cover and the artwork is brilliant and amazing and I love my cover and I think that this would be great. How could you not love it and love what we have? Well, it may be the greatest artwork on the planet, but it may not be appropriate for your content. And even though you may love the cover, it may not be marketable. And when it's not marketable and it's not genre appropriate, it doesn't tell the story, it doesn't tell the feeling of what you're going to get from the book, then the customer or the buyer is going to pass on it. Think about it this way. You have literally 1 to 2 seconds to capture the attention of a customer walking by in a store, 1 to 2 seconds. If that doesn't sing and that doesn't tell me or tell the customer what the book is about, then they're going to pass on it, and that's the reality. So if you're gonna do your own cover, get a professional cover designer. Find someone who actually has done professional covers before, and make sure and look at their designs, look at their previous books, and make sure that it did convey a message of what the book is about. Because otherwise, you're going to end up spinning your wheels on something or spending way too much money on something that ultimately gets declined simply because of the cover. So, very important. Okay. One thing I wanted to hit on is, and do talk a little bit more about, is marketing. Marketing really, really matters. It is one of the probably the biggest key outside of the genre to making the final decision for any buyer or customer. Um, I wanted to say a few things about marketing and why it's so important. There are over 7,000 new books released every single day. That is a monster number. And the question is, are you standing out? What are you doing to stay out in front of those books and make yourself known to buyers? If a buyer is comparing two books, yours and another book that's similar, and you don't have a lot of marketing, but the one does, even though it is the worst written book on the planet, they're going to go with the other one that has a lot of marketing, because the chances that it's going to sell are much, much better. So marketing is really important. It also needs to be ongoing. Well, the first few months of the release is great. It's important, and you definitely want to have it. But as that marketing starts to drop, you also notice the book tapers off in sales as well. And unless you have a big platform, unless you have a big audience, it's hard to keep that up. But if your marketing continues, it'll sustain it and give it a longer tail down the road. So marketing is really important. One of the things I want you guys to know is that 75% of all authors only sell a couple of hundred books, a couple hundred copies during the lifetime of the book. The vast majority of authors really struggle to sell their books. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they feel like they have a book, they printed it out, they got it, it looks great and fantastic, and they do nothing to support it after the first couple of months, or maybe not even at all. And they think people are just going to gravitate towards it and buy it because it is a great book. And while it might be a great book, the reality is if nobody knows about it, they're not going to get it. And that's a grim reality, but it's a tough one. But it's an important one. Now, one thing that you can market your book, and why I really like ebooks, is that there's a lot you can do with ebooks. There's a lot of emotions that you can do. There's things you can do on, there's giveaways or 99-cent promotions, things like that, that can help you build your audience, can help you move forward. And if you can find some of the more some of the covers from the 80s and compare them to the 90s and then into the 2000s, you can definitely see a difference in the covers, and it really is interesting to me because when you're looking at fiction novels, especially, that's where you see the biggest differences. Um, the fads in the 80s tend to be, pictures everywhere with a spilled glass of wine or something that was almost had a collage type feel, to signify some type of thriller or mystery or something along those lines. And of course, you don't see that anymore. You had some in the 90s that tended to have a more clean look. Well, now it's not as clean. They want a little bit more, and they want you to have something that's more interesting. But the one thing I can say about the romance is that romance always has female and male, sometimes single female, sometimes single male. But either way, it has that person with the flowy hair and the part of their shirt ripped apart or something, embracing something else in a very, loving manner, if you will. So that has never changed and will never change. Um, but even when you look at business books, they still tend to be more words than actual pictures. So if you throw a few pictures in there, or graphics, they tend to be a little bit better. So um, you look at the ones, if you really want to see what kind of trends there are, look at the pub dates. Look at on Amazon, they'll show when the release date was of that book, and just look at the year. And usually the books will last 5 to 7 years, are going to be generally about the same. But once you get past that 7-year mark, you'll start to see some of the differences, even in color schemes. Excuse me. The next one I have is book titles. It seems there is a trend to single word title or very few words in the title. Thoughts? Yeah, there is a trend to single word titles. Single word, especially for business books, single word titles have become really, really popular, and they're fine as long as you have a subtitle that explains it, because the common person is not going to understand what that term is. So you have a term that you coined yourself, or even a short for a two-word phrase that you coined yourself as part of your business. Maybe it's part of your branding, and it's something you just built a name for yourself at. But you want to start reaching out to people that are a little bit different, outside of the norm. Well, that's great, but you need to explain what you're talking about, because the average person looking at that book is not going to understand. So single word titles are pretty popular right now. You'll also see things in the subtitle like 10 steps to. That tends to be real popular right now too, especially number 10 and number 5. Those two are really, really common right now. So, sometimes right now it's okay to use it, but I think here pretty soon the market's going to be pretty saturated, and we're already starting to see a little bit of a trend away from the 5 steps and 10 steps, something a little bit different. So hopefully that helps. Other ones, how well do store promos work? For example, Hudson Group Airport bookstores, where you pay to have your books positioned face out near the cash register, etc. Yeah, so store promos work extremely well. There was in a past life, I actually sold wine, and I was a wine salesman, and we talked about wine, and I compare wine to books a lot because of the sheer number of different wines that you see on the shelf. It's like a book. It's completely overwhelming. You don't know which book is what. You know some of the others you don't really know. And so one stat that we had when I was working for the wine company is that your sales improve on a display or promo by 400% or more. And so taking that into consideration, when I kind of used that logic when I came into the book industry, when I was on the wholesale side, and what I found working with retailers is that was still the case. Books sold much, much better on promo than they did anywhere else. on the shelf or otherwise. Now, when you're talking about Hudson, for example, you're talking about the airport. You might you okay. Let's see. We have a question here. You might address this later, but